Okay, let's see if we can do this again. Let's see if we can get some folks. All right, Islam, can you hear us? Is the question. We had some audio problems on the first try. Can you hear us? We want to make sure she can hear us. Okay, good now? All good now? Good, 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 good. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for coming back. We have office hours. We're having office hours. Grand Sheik and I, you know, I have the privilege of talking to you all the time. A lot of people don't have that privilege, and I get to hear all kinds of questions, all kinds of stuff that people would like to say to you personally. And as a matter of fact, we just want you to know too that if you have questions and you put your questions, you want to type your questions here in the comments. We're going to do the best that we can to try to respond to those questions. Hopefully, let them be general questions. If you have a particular situation, a personal problem, I guess I want to say, a situation that you're dealing with, you may want to send us an email to houseofreawakeningminds@gmail.com, and we'll try to, you know, see if we can get you some assistance. But can you let your questions be more general than specific to a certain situation that you have, but it may be something that a lot of people are dealing with. And also we're going to deal with some of the things that you and I talk about that I would, because people call me all the time. Because it seems like I must be the only organization or we, House of Reawakening Minds, that answers their phone. Because when people call, people call and they go, sometimes they go, "Oh my gosh, you answered," and I want to go, "Oh my gosh, you called," you know. So I mean, but most of the times I do answer the phone, and I do try to respond to as best I can to the situations that come up. The people, and then sometimes, you know, it's just about people wanting to express their gratitude. They want to express their gratitude for the videotapes and the teachings that they've been enjoying, some, you know, for years, and some might say, I just discovered, you know, Grand Sheik a couple of months ago, and my life has changed, and I just want to let somebody know. And so those calls, you know, and I listen, you know, I listen intently to all those you know, those messages and stories.
Hopefully we've done some good, hopefully. You know.
Yeah. And that's why I'm grateful that you stayed over and that you agreed to do this, which is, you know, going to be sort of, let's answer some questions or some things we've had discussions.
Do this every once in a while. Help out.
Right, because we know that you have, you know, you have situations sometimes that you just don't get the answer to. While it may be an excellent class, it may not address, you know, the thing that you have in your heart that's burning. So we're going to try to do some of that. Would you also do us a favor? Would you send out, I guess you can share this and let people know that Grand Sheik and I are on live. I know some folks, I think there's a UFC fight tonight, but yeah, but you know, the main event is not yet. They don't do the main event yet, but we hope that you can spend a little bit of time with us. One question I want to start out with was not necessarily a question. Well, then it is sort of a question. It has come up that some people have become confused about nationality and birthright when it comes to the mother's bloodline versus the father. And
yes,
we talked about that.
Last night
we had about it. So I want, if you will.
Now there's a nature reality that has descended into the political reality, and then there's a counter to that.
Okay.
All right. So this must be understood. By nature, government and family is a matriarchy by nature. And it is reflected in most all Asiatic African cultures, period. And it has come down as a custom and tradition in Asiatic and African government and structure. However, you know, with Albion or hybrid European Occidental operations, particularly under the popes of Rome, the structure is patriarchal.
Okay.
Now, the recognition in truth of the lineage of the human family is always traced through the female, because that's established divinely and in nature. That's a fact. That's irrefutable, irregardless. So we have to look at what is done politically, distinguished from that which nature supports and is in reality. All right. So Asiatic African culture, matriarchy. European culture and those who follow Rome, patriarchy. Although, and this is a fact, the Moorish nation is a blend of matriarchy, patriarchy. Now, the ancient Moabite nation, founders of civilization, is a matriarchy. The Moorish nation is the Moabite nation descended into a patriarchal flavor. Now, that's the fact, that's the truth. Now, however, in the philosophies, the matriarchy principle is always maintained and respected in governmental structure in Moorish society, while the face of it may be appearing patriarchal. That must be understood. Whereas in European culture, it's strictly patriarchal. But that's more political than reality. That must be understood.
Okay. But when someone, for instance, and I think the place that I've seen this more, I guess, in more recent times where we can see the distinction, most of the time, you must agree that we see more Moorish men with Albion women that make the amalgamated children, as opposed to Moorish women and Albion men. The exception, and more recently, would be that of Meghan Markle. While Meghan
and others,
like, no, I'm saying others, but when a person, there have been people who've come to the House of Reawakening Minds, and they're real gung ho, you know, for their nationality and birthright, and then they are told that, oh, well, what's your mother's bloodline? So then they're told that
so they must know what that really is. Now, and the deal of it is, it shouldn't be taken personally. It should be taken factually, because when you're dealing with government, now you're dealing with politics,
right?
You know, and so when you're dealing with government and government structure, resources, etc., you deal all over the planet with nationals who are the Aboriginal or the people of the land of that said jurisdiction, and then you have people that may be of other nation states that want to participate or be a part of that. Right. That is naturalization. That is the standard. It's very simple. It's not complex.
But here's the point I wanted to make. So if a person's mother happens to be Albion, then they can still participate.
Exactly. That's what the Naturalization Act is for.
Naturalize instead of nationalize.
Yes, that's what it's for. Now, so people who don't understand this, you know, now, and this is again, when you're dealing with fundamental rule of law, you don't put your personalities in it. You don't put your personal in it. And I think a lot of times when people are looking at these things, they have a tendency to put their personal in it as opposed to the reality. No, so let's keep this simple. Let's keep this simple. Many of the Moorish Americans in North America who are nationalizing now, if they went to the home states of their mates, i.e. England, Ireland, Germany, Deutschland, etc., Switzerland, they wanted to be a citizen or member of that society, they would be naturalized. And conditions would be presented to them where they would have to take tests, they would have to make affirm or swear allegiance, and it must be on paper. And that's the rule all around the world. What makes them offended that that's the rule here?
Well,
no, I'm just saying there should be no offense. There should be understanding what government is. It's sort of like it is government, and I think a lot of people need to really understand government structure because it's based on matriarchy. Same thing as a family, meaning that, like, say for instance, your neighbor's child likes to stay over at your house often, and you want to adopt that child, right? Mm-hmm. That child would be naturalized into your family. However, by inheritance, that child's rights to inheritance does not supersede your organic children.
Okay. That's
the same thing as nationalization and naturalization. If you understand that rule, apply it in government, there's no confusion whatsoever. It's a principle of hereditament, a principle of descendancy. And that's its nationality, and naturalization is based on those fundamental principles. Who's your mother? In other words, whoever your nation state is, you understand that's your mother. Mm-hmm. So whoever your mother is your genealogy. Now you can have blended or hybrid genealogy, but still the tracing is coming through your mother.
Right.
The inheritance comes through your mother. It doesn't deny you privileges that are granted in a political platform. But the deal of it is that the naturalized being person, their rights, they cannot have rights that supersede the Aboriginal. Mm-hmm. Or meaning that you have a son and a daughter that came from your womb. An adopted child can't supersede them in an argument for inheritance of your properties. That the same thing goes in nationalization versus naturalization.
Now, I understand that, but I think this is the point I think I wanted to make. Often I've heard it explained in such a way that if your mother is not a Moor, then you can't be a Moor. They don't explain the naturalization process. And you told me,
let's put it this way.
Yeah.
Like, say for instance,
that piece is left out.
Yeah. If your mother is German, as an example, right? Mm-hmm. And she mates with a Nigerian, right? Then that child's condition. This is why you see even in laws around the world, the condition of the child is condition of the mother. That's why the mother's always because it's based on nature. I think a lot of times people confuse things that are done by legislation from things which are based in nature. Now you have what is called common law in its nature, that's more aligned with natural law. And then you have legislative law or ens legis operations, which can be dismissed, modified, or thrown out. Mm-hmm. Divine law stands.
Okay.
In structured government, like say, for instance, when it's called the common law, even when you're dealing with the issues of the straw man and things like that, what you call corporate constructs, it is the common law that trumps the Roman law and the canon law upon which the straw constructs are built, because it's based on the ancient traditions and customs of your mothers and fathers from time immemorial. So those are what you call unalienable rights or birthrights. They are not legislated. They are in the nature of the being. Just like, in other words, why the same way that it's not debatable that your son or your daughter coming from your womb should have first rights, or it's called firstborn rights, primogeniture rights to your estate, because in relationship to someone you may adopt.
Right.
Now you may give them things and not treat them different. However, in law and rule of descendancy, they can't claim a right that supersedes your birth child. That's law all over the world, and it's not an offensive, and no one should take it offensive. If you and I'll repeat, if you understand that nature principle, you understand nationalization distinguished from naturalization. If a Chinese or Manchurian, say, goes to Russia, they may spend their life in Russia. Now, when you're dealing with the genetic codes, or what you call the homogenized pedigree, he's still Chinese. You know, but he can be a Russian citizen.
Right.
So a European can be a Moorish citizen under the Naturalization Act.
Now, would you say that because you told me there was a church that used to.
Sure, in the West, it's not used to be.
Oh, it still is. Yeah, tell us about that.
Now, mostly in the West, you know, and what's actually in parts of Jersey at one time too. The Europeans who followed the teachings of Noble Drew Ali and also aligned themselves with the real history of the human family, you know, not based on the dynamic politics that we deal with under the controlled narrative thing, established a Moorish Orthodox Church. And they're, you know, naturalized Moors. And of course, within their venue, they may even use what you call a nationalization process. But in true theory, they're naturalized if they're European. No different than if you went to England and you decided to stay in England and become a citizen of that political venue. People must understand the distinction between a political adaptation of citizenship or family membership and the organic membership. So the organic, which means the biological relationship, is what you call pedigree and bloodline. So when you're talking pedigree and bloodline, it answers itself. It has nothing to do with your opinion. You can have an opinion one way or another, but that's a natural answer.
Yeah. Well,
I think a lot of times people who do not understand legislation or what you call civil rule that is made by men and women by choice of decision or how they want to run an order or an organization, that must be distinguished from that which nature herself does not lie. And so your biological children are your nativity. So the biological child is national in all principles of inheritance. And then the non-biological child is what you call citizen under the Naturalization Act.
So that can be two, and then that can fall under one of two categories. That can be either the one who has, whose mother may not be Moorish, but maybe another parent is, or the individual who just says, I would like to adhere to and give my allegiance to the Moorish nation and become
That's why they have pledges of allegiance to political
and to
systems.
become naturalized.
That's what naturalized are. Even when you see people go into different nation states and they have what you call green cards, those are naturalization instruments.
Right.
You know, they are conditional. If such persons violate the constitutional principles of that said political body or your family, you tell them to go home.
Right.
If you get the point. Now, you got the best way to understand any of this is think of ordinary family and the fundamental rules that run a family and the nature of family on the planet. Apply the same principle to nation states on a larger scale, and it gets political, and so you have what you call legislative structure to protect the larger family.
Right.
Now, in its nature, it's harmonic first with the pedigree and bloodline. But then there's another side that deals with the ens legis, or what you call the legislated acceptance, and that would be Naturalization Act. And so, and the best thing to do really is really even go to the law book. You got your Black's Law here.
Let me see. Black's Law.
Yeah, it's good.
Last time I did this, I knocked book stamps.
Oh, you did?
And I see your questions here. Let me see. We're going to let him finish with this point, and then I'm going to scroll back up and look at some of your questions and see if we can get some of your questions answered. So don't think that you're being ignored. And let me see if I can adjust this camera just a little bit so I get a little bit more you in there. There we go. There you go. There you go. There you go. A little less of me, a little more you. So, like I said, thank you so much for taking time out of your really, really busy schedule to be here with us, especially since you didn't know we were going to come on. We're going to get, oh, okay. While you're doing that, here's a good question. Manly P. Hall, what is meant from your perspective? They want to know when a European says they're blue blood.
Well, the reason why Europeans are all usually referred to as blue bloods is because the thin skin of the Albion hybrid is very thin and has limited melanin by the nature of the hybriding. And so the blood often with Europeans can be looked at two ways. According to the paleness of the skin, the blood under the skin looks blue or dark purple, and then sometimes red, which is why sometimes Europeans refer to themselves as redneck, and then also blue blood. And very often in the early Germanic tribes, because keep in mind, all Occidentals are essentially Germanic. Mm-hmm. And they would sometimes paint their faces blue in relationship to the blood that look like blue. When you see, if you look a lot of
like even here, I can see like,
yes, it'll look blue, not red.
Yeah,
it'll look blue, not red. And even so, when the blood is not exposed to air, it actually, when it's exposed to air, it turns more reddish. But actually, when you're looking at the veins through the European skin, very often it looks blue. And so that is more or less a colloquial term that Europeans evolved with, referring to themselves as blue blood.
But all blood is the same color.
Yes,
it doesn't matter who
yes.
you are. Yeah. So the United States is not a nation. So wait a minute. What are they asking? So the United States is not a nation if they can only naturalize, not nationalize.
And this is true. And this is part of the dynamics of the problems that they're having right now. Now that people are, particularly when you have so many Moorish Americans that are making public proclamation of their nationality, because the Europeans, because we're under colonial operations, and the Europeans have used what they refer to as the India-Pacific Company code system, or color code system, to create the caste. And so for particularly after the Kansas-Nebraska Act with the Whiggamore Party, when the Europeans started calling themselves white people, from a law perspective and from a status perspective, it is actually a noble title. White people or white person, free white person is a title that essentially applies to the sovereign rulers of the land, i.e. people of the land. When the Whiggamore Party was suggested under Horace Greeley, for the Europeans to start calling themselves white people, it became to their social engineering advantage to promote the code system of green people, purple people, orange people, brown people, black people, white people, in order for people to forget that they're Europeans, because they were also carrying out their secret Treaty of Verona agenda. And of course, the Spanish Inquisition against the Moors never really ended. And so most of that dynamics of that social engineering is hidden under the veil of what they're calling racism and prejudice and white supremacy, which actually is the Roman Inquisition colonial hegemony project or program under the Unum Sanctum policy and the doctrine of discovery, which is actually what's in operation. And for the people of the land not to be cognate, or what you would say clear on what they're really dealing with, the misdirected and diversionary race argument is presented artfully to them to keep them busy and forgetting that the Europeans are alien to us.
Yeah, well, you're not saying like alien from another planet.
They're alien to us. No different than the Europeans call other people from other nation states
like they'll say illegal aliens.
Yes.
Yeah, that. Okay.
Now, so aliens come under naturalization when they come through the ports, the proper process.
All right.
Now, so when they don't come through the proper process of naturalization, they're alien to that government. You see? Now, one of the things that the Europeans have been practicing here in North America, which is fraudulent, is that they themselves are supposed to be under the Naturalization Act. But because they, under color of law and color of authority, are what you call an interregnum, it's an interregnum government. So they're an interregnum, it's actually NUM. They're pretending to be the sovereign people of the land, which is why they refer to themselves as Americans when they're not. This is also why they also refer falsely to their private corporate operations that really belong to England and the Pope of Rome as America, for people who don't know better, you know, because a lot of people can't read and a lot of people don't know basic third grade geography. So they think that America's a country because they've been socialized to that. Although you could take a child from almost any other nation state that has even a piece of an education, knows that America's a continent. Do you understand?
Right.
But what it does, from a sociological narrative control, it keeps the people uncognate or off the subject matter that the Europeans are alien. You see? Mm-hmm. And that way they, as an example, by right law, Europeans can't own land at North America. This is another reason why they keep claiming to be American. And then by law, they can't own land. And so they use the unum sanctum policy and the doctrine of discovery to artificially and under color of law claim lands under eminent domain of the Aboriginal peoples. This is why in 1913, the members of the Circle Church of the Chancery, who are the bankers and the lawyers, and Woodrow Wilson administration converted all allodial titles and Aboriginal titles, which supersede any other claim, into mortgages and deeds. And through the mortgage and deed systems, they have been gentrifying the people and stealing their land under the doctrine of discovery. And so when you see them running us out of Lower Egypt, which we call, you know, Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia area, they call it the Trail of Tears, North Carolina, etc., stealing our land, that's done under the doctrine of discovery. When you start looking at the records, whereas the Aboriginals would contest the robbery of their land, the courts would even supersede them under the doctrine of discovery. All of it is in violation of law. Keep that in mind. So this issue of calling themselves Americans and then calling their political platform, which is a private corporation, which was registered in France in 1754 by Benjamin Franklin, which was dealing with the service contracts, or what's called the enumerated powers contracts for the Maghreb, or North America, as it was being transferred into the hands of the Germanic tribes. And then you come up to the secret treaty, the Treaty of Peace and Friendship between the Moroccan Empire and Great Britain via the United States colony corporate operations. And because they've been converting the rights of the people into their private United States corporation, this is why it is so important from a political perspective, not from a perspective of truth, from a political perspective, for them to promote the fiction that America's a country, to promote the fiction that they, the European colonists and their descendants, are Americans, and to promote people as brown, green, yellow, white, and black in order for people not to recognize that these people are aliens. And so they question everybody else's nationality, and they do it vehemently and constantly to divert people from questioning their nationality.
Speaking of nationality, and we've had this conversation before, but when someone comes here from another country and so-called allegedly either does or allegedly commits a crime, they will
deport them.
They will arrest them, incarcerate them, and then say following their sentence, their release, they are now going to be deported.
Yes. If
we come from somewhere else other than this continent, why are we not deported after, if we ever get out of incarceration?
Logically, they can't, because we're the nationals. and they have no authority. They have no political capacity to do this. This is why the activities of Senator Bilbo failed when they was doing this thing with Liberia. They tried to pull it before. As a matter of fact, Liberia, and in 93, 94, 95, I used to talk to the ambassador. He used to call me on a regular basis. This was during the time when Michael Jackson used to try to get me to come out there when he was having problems with that boy. Mukesh, as a matter of fact, his name is Mukesh, and I know he doesn't mind because he's in California now. Anyway, he's the brother of the ambassador of Liberia. Now, remember Monroe, the president of the United States Service Corporation, they were trying to promote the same paradigm that these people are suffering today with lack of understanding. And so this is where what is called Liberia on the east side of Mexum, that's where that has its origin. That's no ancient nation, no ancient African nation. This is where they took Moors from North America and were trying to colonize them on that side to try to create a port by which they could start stealing our land and getting our people off. Of course, it did not work. And so even to this day, and I've talked to some Nigerians, since Mukesh, etc. And some of our conversations were along the line, and I'm telling you, that's why some of them have been having problems, because this is their home. It doesn't mean that we're not related. This is their home. The same way that French Muslim school Malcolm, don't come up with that white and black language. That's slave language. You left home. And this is the same thing. Our people have been disconnected mentally from the land. And so, but in law and in fact and in reality, they can't deport the nationals. They themselves are aliens, and they are a private corporation. And any act in the sense of naturalization is actually an act of what you call arbitrary, essentially a war crime, and actually a call of authority, which is why it's never really done. Although they have set up what you would call puppets around the world in other nation states, so to speak, they still cannot supersede that fundamental principle. And so what they have done under their doctrine of discovery is pack the private POW camps of the Jesuits and the Illuminati, dark side Illuminati, which are actually POW camps, which they're calling state prisons with our people. And that's the real origin of why the numbers of our people are so high, because they can't deport them. They can't, and that's a fact.
Yeah, and when you look at now what's happening, and I want to get to some of these questions because there are a bunch of good questions coming up. But before we get there, the fact that after so many, and so many people were loving on Clinton back in the day when he was the president. He's the first black. They were saying things like that. He's the first black president.
And in fact, that really wasn't a false statement. That was a true statement.
Okay.
But we can go into that later.
But what the point I wanted to make is that under his administration, it's more of us went to prison. More Aboriginal families were broken up. The 3 strikes.
More of our men have packed the prisons.
Right.
More of our women have packed the prisons in the Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton administration than in the entire history of all the presidents at North America.
Again, you touched on this last night, and I'm so glad that you started bringing up the fact that we have this really unnatural allegiance to either party,
and that unnatural allegiance is even one of the arguments that the Ku Klux Klan had about our people in the first place in the political platform of the United States Service Corporation, which was a legitimate argument.
Okay. Well,
it is. In other words, like, you can't be a member of the nation state that conquered you.
Right.
You can be their subject, you can't be their member.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, this has much to do with the 14th, now on another level, has much to do with the ens legis corporate person constructed in 1868 under the, Negro Acts and stuff like that, under the Ku Klux Klan, when they closed the Freedmen's Bureau. And of course, because many of our people who are conversos, wanting to be Constantinians, in the name of Christianity, they wanted desperately to be a member of the Europeans' order. Now, remember, the treaty was already there, but they want to be Negro, blacks, and coloreds, which is brands of the Europeans, their property. So that's what the 14th Amendment is for. Were
they aware of the treaty and wanted to be something else, or were they cut off from the reality that there was a treaty? Because I didn't know there was a treaty until I met you.
Let's put things in timeline.
Okay.
Isn't it true that cases like the Dred Scott case were common fare?
No,
no. I'm just saying. All right, let's back up. Let's back up.
Not to me.
No, let's back up.
Okay.
Let's put it in timeline.
All right. At the time, right.
The Dred Scott case of 1857 is known by scholars around the world, not just here, and is a study case for scholars all around the world as being the most important slave case ever to come before the Supreme Courts of the United States. So we're not talking about some haphazard, this case, that case. That's measured as the most important case. Dealing with citizenship, the very nature of what we're talking about.
Okay.
Right? And of course, those of you who are aware of the Dred Scott case, that case is used as a measure of citizenship, not just here, but around in other nation states. They've used that as a reference point too. And the issue is status, not complexion, not color, status. People keep talking racism, it's status. Are we clear? He's not European. He can't be part of a European private corporation that conquered Moors. Duh. Like dumb. It had nothing to do with the Sanford family taking them into the Missouri territory. However, people like to argue color, race, because that's their training. Wasn't the issue of the case. The case was plaintiff in error. Now, again, we put it in time context. The William Dungy case that Abraham Lincoln did in 1853, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in that area. It's common knowledge that if you called our people black, you had to fight because it was always a setup under the unum sanctum policy to set up Moors to steal their estate. And so it's a slander and it's pejorative. And so the William Dungy case, although he was Portuguese, the case was won on the basis that he's Moor. So this is common knowledge, even up to present. It's just suppressed. It's common knowledge in Masonry. First lesson they get in all these secret societies is root to Moabitus. That's not a secret. The deal of it is the masses have been groomed into the black codes, and they're trying to measure past history with the socialization that is contemporary. Meaning their linguistics are contaminated. It's sort of like someone bringing up or putting on a question here, what do you think about George Washington and Lafayette? Did Lafayette have a Galaxy 10 and George Washington have an iPhone, or was it reversed? And then, so the question itself is already corrupted. Because it's out of sequence. It's out of timeline. And this is why it's important for people to know fundamental logistics and etymology when they're doing research, because they have a tendency to try to take contemporary social engineering terms and phrases and place them in a period of time when they did not exist. Not unlike when you see a lot of our people talk about these problems that we have today, these social problems that we refer to the Europeans as white people. When if you go, say beyond 1854, or in when the Knights of Columbus Ku Klux Klan oath was taking place in Philadelphia, and actually maybe what you say casually, a decade or more before then, the Europeans were not called white people.
Right. You have their own people saying, we weren't this until,
But look at this. It ain't them. It's our people that keeps trying to our so-called scholars that keep on trying to take retroactive social engineering that they know is social engineering and try to legitimize it because they have written a lot of books claiming green people, purple people, don't matter what color you are, and white people, and they put them in timelines when those social engineering paradigms did not exist, and it's absolutely provable. And rather than admit that they're wrong and stop perpetrating false information to help denationalize their own people for a few pieces of coins, you know, because the corporations put funds aside for their little Negro organizations. And so for them to be funded, they got to go along with this black and Negro marching paradigm, rather than tell the truth of the history. Even with the letter J and Jesus thing, the whole paradigm. But the point of it is the fact that our people are Moors is common knowledge to all scholars around the world. It is a problem in North America because Morocco's under occupation, and that knowledge is masonically suppressed. None of this is unknown. What it is, you have people who know this, who are what you could say compromised, and will not get black funding if they talk if they don't say that the brands are African identities. So they will teach the children that Black History Month is African. Black means African. They know damn well it doesn't. You know, I'm just telling you. And so the deal of it is this social engineering creates paradigms of misinformation to the level that when our people really try to solve problems, they're actually incompetent. Do you understand? And then, of course, when the responses that they expect they don't get, because they think they know what's up, they often take offense. When they shouldn't be offended, they need to be re-educated. You know, and so
I don't mean it. The interesting thing about these new phones, you can turn your phone off and it still rings. I turned it off, as in turned it off.
Like off.
Like off. But now but it still rings.
You turned it off. That don't mean
they turned it off. Yeah, it means that it was, still tap again. I did this, and then but you heard it ring, right?
Yeah, that don't
I'm
mean
sorry,
that
y'all. Yeah, you know, we know that they're always listening, but
so
but you know, here's another thing I want to say to you. You know, one would think, or some, would say, well, if we were already here, and I'm not questioning that, but if we were already here, how did we go from being the indigenous Aboriginal peoples of the land to being what the so-called?
We didn't really go
here we
anywhere.
go. Well, but we didn't go anywhere. But the so-called slave, that period of enslavement, you got people who will literally say, well, my great-great-great-grandmama was a slave. Like, how did we go from being indigenous Aboriginal to having people come over here? Were we more sharecropping our own? What happened to take us from where we were owning,
how did we get back to doctrine of discovery?
But I want to help me and maybe some others of how do we go from being here and all that to being under any level of
social engineering, disconnect. In other words,
so how did they? What process did they use to socially?
It's called psychological disassociation.
Okay.
And so you disconnect the people from the land and from inherited.
Was that the moving us to Trail of Tears, that kind of thing?
Which they use to this very day, even in the military. Yes. From the southeast, they moved them northwest. From the northeast, they moved them to the southwest. Same patterns used in the military today to disorient the people, and also so if they ran away, they would be in an unfamiliar surroundings, etc., even though on their own land. This is why it's also called the Trail of Tears, or even with what you would call the trade triangle up here in the north, between Boston, Philadelphia area, Chicago, the old.
You're familiar with where you are, but when they put you on the whole other side of now you got to reacclimate yourself, figure out how you're going to live, and then now you become
because
dependent
you have no reference points, and so your chances of going any long distance and surviving without capture would be slim.
Okay.
And not that you wouldn't know that you're on your land, but it's no different than taking someone from Sichuan in China to say near Taiwan, which was also part of China.
Oh, really?
Okay. Oh, yeah, really. I mean, the political separation is contemporary. You know, just like North and South Korea is a contemporary paradigm.
Okay, yeah, because it's just Korea or whatever
exactly.
or whatever it was
All
before
of those were acts committed by Europeans who invade and have been attacking Asiatics around the world.
Well, listen, back to this original question somebody asked. Somebody says here that blue blood also, and we were just talking about it, blue blood also means noble, because you said something else.
They would use that as their noble, as a symbolic of their nobles, you know. But in the Asiatic world, Arab would reference noble. Arab is not a people. It's not a bloodline. It's not a nation. It is it's Persic in its origin, or more related to, you know, Urdu in that area of linguistics, and it actually means noble, and it was generally applied to people of Asiatic African descent. Even when you start looking at, like, say, if you look at, even when they look at, like if any of you have any of your great-great-grandmothers or grandfathers' pictures, where they have notations written in them, they refer to the chieftains and the shakuns here as noblewomen and noblemen. You know, it's not anybody knows the culture knows that. But what I think, because the people have been socialized into thinking that Arab is an identity of Asiatic African people in certain areas of Saudi Arabia, etc., that's a bloodline. It's not a bloodline. It means noble, and it applies to Asiatics and Africans, Moors in general.
I'm just going to let them know what we're talking about. Somebody commented that blue bloods means noble, but earlier Grand Sheik and I, but earlier before we came live, Grand Sheik and I were talking about, he was explaining to me the fact that the term Arab meant noble, means
it's not a bloodline.
It's not a bloodline, and it means noble. And the other thing that we were having a discussion about, and this thing is not letting me go back. I was trying to go back to some of the questions, but the other thing that we were having a discussion about that we were clarifying is we were watching something on YouTube, and there's been, if you've been watching any of the CNNs or Foxes or anything, there's a lot of talk of anger on both sides of the aisle of this freshman, is she a congresswoman who's is she Palestinian or
yes,
whatever? They're saying that she's anti-Semitic, and we were explaining to me about what
it's a double lie. Or like an oxymoron, but they know that the people are under connotative linguistic social engineering control. Now, the name Semitic, not unlike Mendelssohn and Darwin, German, naturalists, etc. Semitic is a modern term or modern name created. It has no ancient origin, and it generally refers to people of Canaanite, Moabite descent, i.e. Asiatic African people, or people what you call your North African linguistic forum. And it's a general term. And so when they refer to the European Ashkenazi and Khazarian Jews, etc., as Semitic, they're actually lying, because in fact they are not Semitic at all, because they are really European hybrid stock. They're Occidentals. They're not even, of real Canaanite origin anyway, but because they did that issue with stealing the land and changing the maps under European colonial operations of the still the Spanish Inquisition under the popes of Rome, disguised as other things. And so essentially what they call Israel today is really Canaan, and Palestine is Canaan, and they changed the map and made an artificial nation in order to change history, the narrative of the people. And this is a known fact. We're not even talking deep scholarship, and everybody that's honest knows that. So when they're talking about that sister being anti-Semitic, they're really saying you're against yourself.
Right, because we don't.
Because she's Semitic. If anybody is, not them European Jews. Now that's the fact, and that's not anything against Europeans who claim to be Jews. It's just a simple fact and truth, and people need to know that. It's another reason why it's dangerous for people really not to have fundamental etymological skills. Fundamental. Those are fundamental.
We tend, our people unfortunately tend to jump on these bandwagons of
because they're trained with belief systems. So beliefs are for dummies, imbeciles, rabbits, and people who aren't willing to handle reality.
The truth.
And so such persons, if they're adults, they're referred to as boys and girls, and sometimes referred to as minorities, because they usually are trained, not because they're not intelligent, but they're trained under the John D. Rockefeller system of education with the Frederick T. Gates and the Bertram Russell operations of the education in North America, and they fundamentally can't read. And many of them are because of pride, will not take the time to really just study third grade grammar and go back to the fundamental rules. So that makes them subject, and many of our people, subject to connotative linguistics. And through the connotative linguistics, the European controls what they refer to as the narrative.
And they're doing it.
It's easily done. It's easily done. This is, again, and as you looked at last night, we had a few people in there, you know, who just came to the class, right, to the House of Reawakening Minds. And to show how simple this stuff is, we just pulled dictionaries off the shelf, didn't we?
Yeah.
Or didn't we?
Yeah,
Hand it to them and let them go through it and show them that they're not black and show them that they're Moors.
But people, like you said, we've written songs about being black. They have T-shirts about black girls rock and
they're vested
black
in,
and they don't want. They would rather go along with the deception.
They would rather be the hypocrite and condemn the truth than to really fix this thing.